Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, right as we think that the Kohberger case, the Idaho 4 case is over with, we come up with some new revelations, some new documents released. And, you know, people that look at this person, if you could call him a person, look at him as this mysterious person, this potential serial killer, a guy who just slaughtered 4 students in their bed on November 13th, 2022. Incidentally, it's coming up on 3 years. It was like any other Saturday at 1122 King Road. It was a house full of friends in a community that hadn't recorded a murder in 5 years. Kaylee and Madison spent their night out at a local spot, the Corner Club, and grabbed some late night food from a food truck before heading home. Zana and Ethan were at a party at the Sigma Chi fraternity house, just a quick walk away. By 2 a.m., everyone was back at the house. A little before 4 a.m., a DoorDash order arrived for Zana, a totally normal detail that would become a crucial timestamp in a horrifying timeline. Sometime after 4 a.m., the unthinkable happened. An intruder armed with a large military-style knife slipped into the home through a sliding glass door. The attack was swift and utterly merciless. The killer moved with a chilling sense of purpose, going to the 3rd floor first, where he stabbed Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez to death as they slept. He then went down to the 2nd floor. There he found Zana Knodel awake in her room. She fought back with everything she had, but was ultimately killed. Her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, was also murdered in her room. Investigators would later say the entire horrific event could have taken as little as 2 to 4 minutes. In those few minutes, 4 futures were stolen, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror and a community plunged into shock and terror. We at the Police Off the Cuff podcast, the Police Off the Podcast family, have covered this case from the very beginning. And it was quite interesting and intriguing from an investigative perspective and from a police perspective. But when you look at this animal, this tormented animal, as you see up on the screen, and using that word to describe him to me is highly appropriate, because that's who he is, that's who he was, that's who he aspired to be. Was he aspired to be a serial killer? Like, why is that your goal in life? The PhD student at Washington State University, he just idolized former serial killers, I should say. He would have been a fellow serial killer had he not been caught. But we all know what happened there. So we're going to discuss some of the new happenings, some of the new documents that came out, some of the new findings that we've heard just of late. And so I want you to hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your thoughts, hold on to your prayers, because you're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off the cuff zone, the police off the cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
You know, folks, if you like this show, hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, like, share, make lots of comments that will affect our show. Hit the algorithm and our show will grow as we deserve to. Joining me tonight, and I'm thrilled to have these two with me, former NYPD, I should say retired, not former, retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney at law. Let's welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me on. Good to see you.
Always great to have you, Mike. You know something? The next guy we have is a retired NYPD detective. I'd like to say he's a professor. He is professorial in some ways. Not a lot of ways, but some ways. and he's straight out of Brooklyn. Welcome to the show, retired detective Phil Grimaldi. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Billy, and hello, Mike, and hello, everybody in Police Off the Cuff family.
You know, one of the things that I realized in picking this topic tonight was that today is October 22nd. November 13th, 2022 was when this horrific crime occurred. And that will be 3 years, this November 13th, 2022. Unbelievable how much time has gone by. When you think of the heinous nature of this crime and you think of the families here that are still and will always live with this, but have been tortured living with this for 3 years. Professor Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, when you look back, 3 years now has gone by so fast. So many things have happened and so much revelations have occurred. And if he had not pled guilty this past summer, he would have been probably in the midst of the trial right about now. And so that shows you, the amount of investigation, the extent of that investigation, all the work they did to arrest him, all the work they did subsequent to arrest him, all the information they had. It was a horrific date in for us and for those people of the families, the four families, and the families and everyone living in Moscow, Idaho. That will never be forgotten. As long as anybody's alive, that date will never be forgotten, unfortunately, because of what BK did to those people.
You know, Mike, you look at him, pictures of him. This is a picture of him when he first got arrested.
Mhm.
And he looks like any normal human being. But what is inside that's this savage's brain that made him do what he did? What inspired him? And I'm saying that rhetorically, what inspired him to get a K-bar knife and to go to that house and slaughter 4 college students, all of the age between 19 and 21 years old? All had bright futures, all had loving families, all had a community that loved them. And this savage took their lives. Just very difficult to understand. Phil, your thoughts?
My thoughts, Billy, when we look at the profile of BK, we know that from his history, his past, his childhood, he was extremely overweight at one point. He was a heroin addict at one point, and it appears that he had social, I guess that you want to call them disabilities. It seemed like he wasn't able to maintain a normal relationship with the opposite sex, with a female. Now, I looked into some of the things that he did. He used a knife, obviously, in this case, which obviously shows an intimate and personal nature. When you have a close contact attacker, it's very intimate and very personal. We've discussed that numerous times in the past. When you have this overkill that we're going to talk about tonight, these are other indicators: emotionally charged, jealousy, anger, humiliation. So I think that somewhere, somehow in his past, he was humiliated, perhaps by the opposite sex. And we still don't know the answer to question why he targeted 1122 King Road on November 13th, 2022. Perhaps there was some type of an interaction with one of the victims in this case, and there was something that he perceived as humiliating. I mean, those are conjectured on my part. They're assumptions. But when you look at the profile of serial killers and we look at BK's profile, it seems to lead into that direction. So we do have study of other killers in the past. When we talked about the Night Stalker killer and John Wayne Gacy and all these different serial killers, we know that from studying them, that Bryan Kohberger falls into some of the categories of the things that we uncovered with regard to those killers. Again, Ted Bundy, another serial killer. So I think that with this case going forward, obviously the prosecution part is over since he pled guilty, but we have to look deeply into the actions that BK took during this horrific quadruple homicide.
You know, as Jim Clemente from the FBI said when he was on our show, and Jim Clemente is the head writer for that. Now I'm thinking
Criminal
of
Minds.
Criminal Minds.
The Criminal Minds, as well as the person that wrote the profile of the serial killer for Gilgo Beach 12 years before he was caught, and it was exactly fit Rex Heuermann. So Jim Clemente had asked us, and I'm going to try to keep to this on this show, don't say his name. Let's refer to him as inmate number 163214. 163214. That's who he is on this show, because it's been proven that serial killers, mass killers like this guy, they want their name publicized. They want a little fame out of this. So one of the things that we found out, the autopsy has been released, and the overkill nature of these murders of these kids is really disturbing. This is from Court TV.
Who had 20 plus stab wounds, and the document states that she had sharp force injuries, asphyxial injuries, blunt force injuries, and that her fatal injuries included lacerations in her left lung and liver, subdural bleeds, a stab behind her clavicle that cut her subclavian vein and artery. Phil, very hard to hear, but the reality is that is not one stab wound to the heart. That is not a quick get in, get out. That is purposeful, and she's moving, and Bryan Kohberger's going after her, and repeated stab wounds. The number of injuries surprises me a little bit when you hear all four were killed by one person in their home, 4 a.m. It happened, so many stab wounds, so many injuries.
It is shocking,
you're right.
Judge Ashley. And
You know, I think we should comment upon this since we are the real popo. You know, I find this to be disturbing because not only, as Phil said earlier on, that the personal nature of killing someone with a knife, and then the rage involved. The rage. What was this savage, inmate number 163214? What was he so mad about? And why did he direct this rage towards these 4 kids? Why? And I think, you know, that's one of the reasons that you, I, and Mike Geary here, all former police, were pissed off, to use some New York street lingo. We were quite upset that the prosecutor in this case, Bill Thompson, we had no problem with the plea arrangement, but dude, get something for the plea. Don't just get the plea and not make him allocute, not make him say what he did, not make him admit to the heinous nature of the crimes he did. I find, and every time I see an interview with Bill Thompson, I'm like, bullshit, you're lying. You are lying. You could have gotten him to say where he threw that knife. You could have got him to say what caused him to do that. You could have got him to say 10 or 15 different things. He did none of that. He made him say yes 4 times, and that really was horrific to me. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Bill. Thompson is not the kind of prosecutor you want when one of your loved ones is injured or killed. This guy, he folded like wet cardboard in the end. It looks like he really didn't want to do this trial, because within, I think, like 48 hours of Ann Taylor coming forward with a request for some sort of plea offer, he folded. And he contacted the families, but he had already had his mind made up. They weren't going to be really part of his consideration, because 2 families wanted him to go to trial and be found guilty. 2 didn't. 2 wanted the plea. But actions speak louder than words. And when you look at Bryan Kohberger, the overkill, as Phil said, that's intimate rage. Why? But we want to know why he had intimate rage towards these 4 people. I'm thinking Ms. Gonsalves and Madison were the first ones. Were the ones, 1 or 2 of them. Kaylee and Ethan. I think they were kind of like a collateral. I hate to say that, but a collateral kind of thing. I don't think they were the targets. But I think Madison and Kaylee died because they represented the kind of girl that to Kohberger was unobtainable. It felt like Phil said, humiliation. In his past life, he probably built up a lot of anger and resentment towards that kind of beautiful young blonde girl. And when he had the opportunity, he killed and he vented every bit of his rage that he had built up over the years. He vented it and right onto those girls and stabbed them, and all that rage was captured in his actions. So, we think that's probably what happened. We would like to hear it from his own words. He could have been forced to tell us why exactly he chose those girls and how he met those girls. Was it a random thing? Was it at the Mad Greek restaurant? But Thompson gave it all up. He had all the cards, and Ann Taylor had none. He had all 52
So,
cards.
Mike, it's like folding your
Yeah,
Mike, it's like folding your hand with 4 aces. That's what
exactly. And that is unforgivable as far as I'm concerned.
From the chat, I just want to address this. USA Kiwi 1986. But Thompson said they couldn't find evidence he was at or in the house or had any connection to any of them. I believe that, and you're going to be maybe shocked, I believe he's lying. I believe Bill Thompson's lying. I don't think he wanted to go to trial. He had 3 trials in his career. You think he wanted to take one of the biggest murders in the entire nation to trial with that kind of track record? Again, and I also think, and I don't know, but I think he's probably anti-death penalty. So he didn't want to even use the death penalty as the leverage to go forward. But we know, according to digital evidence, 23 times he reconned 1122 King Road. So that's no evidence. That's a lot of evidence right there. There was also evidence that Kaylee Gonzalez was being stalked at least 2 to 3 weeks before this occurred. So when he says there's no evidence, he was also down with knocking the house down. And we, former law enforcement, we found that to be outrageous. And so did every other former law enforcement. So when Bill Thompson, in his very mellow voice, says there was absolutely no evidence, that's bullshit. And I don't believe it. And I don't believe any of his investigators either. I think they were all down with the University of Idaho. They were told what to do, what to say, and they followed suit. Phil, I can see you want to jump in.
Yeah, Billy, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's his opinion that there was nothing direct connecting BK or inmate. That is his opinion. Now, was there actual text messages or some type of relationship or a meeting that someone could testify to in court that BK and one of the victims met? Probably not. But what you just brought up, the 23 recons, he at some point was targeting this location. Now, it could be specifically the location because of where it was, where he could access it through the back, slip into a screen door. Perhaps he did surveillance and he saw that this was a party house and people in and out. And then he stumbled upon one or more of the victims and targeted them. We don't know whether it's the location, the victims, or a combination of both. But to say that there was no connection, I find that very, very hard to believe. I agree with you, Billy. And I think that that's a matter of his opinion because perhaps there's no telephone record or some type of a witness that says, yes, the two of them did meet, or perhaps text messages or emails going back and forth. Maybe that's not there, but there's definitely some type of a connection between BK and these young ladies or that location.
Phil, it's very powerful evidence too. Omission. When someone turns their phone off because they're about to do something, that is very powerful evidence. And then once they do the dirty deed, they turn the phone back on. That, Mike, that is so powerful. You're an attorney. That speaks volumes.
Yeah, it's consciousness of guilt because enough technology. Thank you, Phil. Enough technology that this is going to track you. You turn this off and you turn it back on when you think you're safe. But the amazing thing is the timing of turning it off and turning it back on several hours later matches perfectly with him leaving Washington University and with him coming back a few hours later. And that is just, as Matt Murphy has said, that's just as strong as keeping that phone on, because you match up the video of him, surveillance video of him leaving and going, and you match up the times. There's no coincidence. You can easily argue to a jury that that's circumstantial evidence of his consciousness of guilt.
100%. Letici from the chat, he also deleted a lot of things on his phone.
Yes.
He may possibly have been inside that house before. Letici, he knew that house too well. He knew how to get in there. That sliding glass door on the second floor was open almost all the time because he had reconned it. He had been driving around that area. He had seen that house. He had been studying that house. He didn't just accidentally go to that sliding glass door, right? So all of these things, like Professor Geary loves that expression, consciousness of guilt. And it's so true. And again, we're not criticizing Bill Thompson for taking the plea. It was probably a good idea because you never know what a jury's going to do. What we do question is that he got virtually nothing for the plea. And when I heard him say that, how could we tell if what he told us was true? Are you kidding me, dude? Are you a first-year lawyer? I mean, you sound like a rookie cop. How about you say, you take us to where you threw the knife in the river. You take us there, right? You take us to where you threw your bloody clothing, right? You tell us how you did this, right? You tell us what was the connection. Did you know any of these girls? Did you have any connection with them? The rage that was shown during these murders is consistent with him being dissed. That's another street word, disrespected. He was enraged by that. Someone dissed him. One of these girls disrespected him. They weren't all supposed to be there. Perhaps one of them was being targeted, Madison Mogan. Certainly, many agree that it was her who was being targeted. But we will never, ever find that out for sure now because they didn't make this inmate 163214. They didn't make him allocute. They didn't get anything for this plea other than 4 life sentences without parole. And that remains to be seen too, because, we see many people that received life sentences without parole 30 years ago that are now walking free. So I never take that for granted that a life sentence without parole is, you can get some progressive politicians in there and change all the sentencing laws. That we've seen it happen in New York, and I'm not going to get political, but we've seen a governor in New York parole cop killers that all were sentenced to life without parole. And the governor passed a law, let's parole them. So I don't ever take for granted anything. And that's why I didn't take for granted that offering this plea, I felt, it was probably a good idea, but get something for it, Phil.
Yeah, Billy, just think about it. If you get something for it. Now, the minute that the defense approaches the prosecution and says, we want to make a deal, we want to plead guilty to life without the possibility of parole to avoid the death penalty, that's the time when the prosecutor comes up with a number of questions that are unanswered. 10, 20, 50 questions, whatever it is. You sit down and you have ways to figure out if you're being told the truth or if you're being told a lie. You have investigators. He had a team of investigators. They go out and they corroborate some of the evidence. The minute you catch him in a lie, you tear up the deal and he goes to trial. Now, we've discussed that. But Mike Vecchione brought something up very important the other night on this show. And I think, Bill, you touched on it a little bit just now, too. We don't know what's going to happen in the years to come. Laws could change. Rules could change. Life without the possibility of parole. Now, if you get a strong law firm or a lawyer that presents to a judge and he grants a hearing on something that happened during this case, and they can revisit whether or not Bryan Kohberger, or I'm going to say BK, sorry about that, Billy. We don't want to use his name, but whether or not BK, there was something that happened that was unfair, and now they could say, well, he wasn't given the proper sentence, and he could have parole. Now, we would hope that would never happen, but the possibility exists. However, if you had all the different things that he did and all those 50 or 20 or 10 unanswered questions answered by him in his own words, do you think you could ever get that far? I doubt it very highly. And an experienced prosecutor like Michael Vecchione agreed and brought that point out the other night on the show.
Bell Italia, 3:30. Sergeant Bill, amen. Prosecution said they could not make him, per the law, give the details. Is that true?
That's not true.
I don't believe a word Bill Thompson says. We had Mike Vecchione on, who was the chief of the Brooklyn Homicide Bureau for, I don't know, like 20 years. He said
he was with the DA's office over 30 years, Bill.
He said that he felt that Bill Thompson was scared. He was afraid of his own shadow. All the bullshit he's saying on these shows is nonsensical. Oh, how do we know if we asked him a question, he would tell us the truth? Are you kidding me? This is policing 101, and you're an attorney. You're a district attorney. If you make a statement like that, you don't belong in that job. You got to be kidding me. But when people spoon nonsense like that to people that don't know the difference, oh, he's telling the truth. No, he's not telling the truth. And even his investigators, the lieutenant and the captain that were on, I believe it was CBS, I was even astounded by them and they're sort of lackadaisical, like, oh, we couldn't do this. Look, in New York City, at the time that we were all on the job, we were balls to the wall. You know what I mean? We knew how to get information from people. And I'm not saying we did it legally. We weren't beating anybody up or torturing anybody. We did it legally, but we knew how to do it. And we didn't stop until we got the information. This is ridiculous that when he says, oh, there was no, I cringe when they say this. And then we find out now with the release of all this autopsy stuff, the overkill nature. I'm going to go back to Court TV right now.
Madison Mogan, her autopsy report, fatal injuries, lacerations to the left lung and liver. Maddie only had sharp force injuries. The weapon was very sharp. Suspect used a lot of force. Joanna, you said earlier it's hard. You're not going to be able to put yourself in the position of the person that, if you want to call him a person, that did this. But just from a logistical standpoint, being able to pull this off, you have to be physically and mentally in a state of where adrenaline's running through your body, and there's got to be a factor of rage or something, because it's just he mutilated 4 individuals in a very short amount of time. It's horrible.
Yeah, it is terrible. Reading this is just as it shines this light and makes it very, very clear that there had to be something more to it. I think that's just what people want to believe, because it's like, how not only are you carrying this out and against 4 people, but stabbing tends to be so personal. Like you were saying, you see this in these dating relationships or where there's something that happened, and then you have the asphyxiation as well. Like a strangulation is some kind of like more personal type of crime that we typically see. And so those combination, when you see that for Kaylee, but you don't necessarily see the same report for Madison, it almost makes you wonder, was there something that triggered this between him and Kaylee that trickled over into the rest of the home, but was his intention really targeted towards her? Again, we don't know, but those little nuggets or clues that are left behind make you wonder that yes, they were strangers. They didn't personally know him, but was there some off the cuff remark or something that happened in a parking lot or some chance encounter at some point that really made them the target of his fixation?
And it's interesting. I think the word targeting can be misused or misunderstood, because I know the police in Moscow said no.
Something. I'm sorry. I don't believe the police in Moscow know what they're talking about. How many murders have they investigated, Phil? They had one murder. They had one murder in five years. In 5 years there. So I don't think they know what they're talking about. So when they get interviewed on these, oh, we don't believe. Well, what is your experience to say you don't believe? How many murders have you investigated in the past 5 years? Oh, one? Are you kidding me? It just, look, you get better at investigating crime by doing it. You know what I mean? And if you get no murders, you're not going to be a good murder investigator. And when people ask you questions about murder that are very technical in nature and may hinge upon the psychosexual nature of an offender, you basically have no background in it. And they weren't even considering that. I never heard Bill Thompson also said, which totally blew me away, there was absolutely no sexual nature to these crimes. Oh my God. I was like, dude, what are you talking about? And we personally on this show, Professor Mike, Phil Grimaldi, myself, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, had Dr. Joni Johnson, a forensic psychologist, on the show, say there is no doubt this is psychosexual, sadistic in nature. And I never heard a single investigator from Idaho even mention anything like that. We had retired FBI agent Jim Clemente say this is a psychosexual, sadistic killer. So what were they missing? Did they not have access to the same people we had as podcasters? What were they missing? Answer that, Professor Mike.
Bill, I think what they were doing, and we've alluded to this before in the past few months, was that by playing down the amount of evidence they had against them, playing down the savagery of the attacks, playing down the fact that there was stalking, playing down that the fact that this might have been a psychosexual killing, getting rid of all that and putting that aside so the public at the time did not know about those sorts of things. I think in Bryan and Bill Thompson's mind and everyone else's mind, made it easier to sell to the public this plea deal, made it more palatable to the community. But after now, you're finding out that, there was this savagery, there was this stalking. People are saying that there was a psychosexual component to it. Now that they know that, they're more upset than ever because it was hidden. But at the time that they went with that plea deal, he wanted to sell. He actually wanted to lower expectations of the prosecution's case. So therefore, it would look better to the public that they accepted a plea deal. He undersold his own case. He had everything going for him, and he didn't want to do the trial. He didn't have the intestinal fortitude to see it through to its logical conclusion. If you can't bring this person to trial with the death penalty hanging over their head like the sword of Damocles, then who else could you ever try for a capital murder in Idaho? Who else would be more deserving of the death penalty than this person? And so by playing it down, accepting a plea bargain in this case, folding like wet cardboard, he's kind of set precedent and lowered people's expectations, lowered citizens' expectations. And therefore, you get another case where 1 or 2 killings. Nope, this is we're going to plead this. We're going to plead this. This isn't going to be a capital case. And so he gets rid of that issue. And that's sad because despite whatever he may think about the death penalty, he had a duty after that person was indicted for murder to go for the death penalty in his case because it fit several of the grounds for asking for the death penalty, and he folded, and he should be ashamed of himself.
You know, Mushy Mystic from the chat. My opinion on these facets is that Bill Thompson stuck to evidence and what he could show with proof rather than alleging evidence of cyberstalking and sexual nature, which wasn't borne out. Mushy Mystic, I disagree with you. First of all, he got a plea. The guy pled guilty, right? So Bill Thompson had a royal straight flush. He had 4 aces in his hand. So he never had to try the case. And he had a boatload of evidence. That DNA on the knife sheath was the smoking gun. It was the smoking gun. So when people say, there was tons of evidence, digital evidence, the video evidence of the Hyundai Elantra canvassing the house prior to the murder. The fact that we alluded to before that he turned his cell phone off and then back on again. That is a lot of evidence. There's more, there's tons more. But to say that he was just going to stick with the evidence, he didn't have to stick with anything. He didn't try the case. And he had all the evidence that he needed. So I don't want to, I just get a little annoyed at this in the fact that, I don't think they're telling the truth. I really don't. And to me, one of the biggest pieces of evidence that they're not telling the truth is right here. Why did they knock that house down before the potential trial? To me, that speaks volumes, and that speaks a mistake in the prosecution. And I think the pressure from the University of Idaho to knock this house down was overwhelming. And that's why I believe that the district attorney, who probably is beholding to the University of Idaho, and everyone else agreed to knock that house down, even though it was the wrong thing to do. Phil.
Yeah, Billy, in the words of Thompson, perhaps there was no sexual contact. There was no rape that took place in this case. That, I believe, is true. However, think about this. When you do research on knife wounds and killings, it often reflects rage, passion, or a desire to dominate or feel the victim's death. Symbolic penetration, it's psychologically stabbing, can have sexual or aggressive symbolism. It's a method that involves repeated thrusting and physical exertion. Knife attacks often occur in emotionally charged crimes, jealousy, anger, humiliation, which we talked about, rather than coldly calculated ones. Now, this isn't like somebody bumped into another person in a bar and that person pulled out a knife and stabbed at one. This was cold, calculated, it was premeditated, and it has all the earmarks of a sexually motivated attack. We've said that before. We've had the experts on, and I believe that experts could have come into court and testified to that fact based on the history of BK. Now, he wants to use he's picking words and saying that there was no sexual component. Maybe evidentiary, like I said, there was no actual rape. There was no penetration. There was no signs of sexual touching or anything. However, we know from what we know, studying serial killers and people that commit these types of crimes, that there's a sexual component to it. We had the experts on. So for him to say that, is he outright lying? Maybe not outright lying, but he's not telling all that there is to tell. He's using the specific words. And yeah, there was no, like I said, there was no actual rape or anything. But do we know from the psychology of these types of killers, sexual component? 100%.
This is an episode of Police Off the Cuff. You're going to recognize some of the players here, but we had Dr. Joni Johnson on. Let me play a bit of this. Dr. Joni, I just want to ask you something. Now, Bryan Kohberger, the man, I mean, he in his plea, he showed almost no emotion. He just said yes, yes, yes. I thought, to me, that was a little bit disturbing, but just sort of showed that he is a psychopath.
Well, I certainly don't think he has a lot of remorse about what happened. So we can trace some of his development from childhood and some of his events that happened to him that were painful and traumatic, and we can kind of fast forward to here. But I think that at the point where he committed these murders, he had long ago if he had remorse for anything he did in the past, he had extinguished that, because this took so much planning, so much fantasizing, so much reconnaissance, as you were saying. He's certainly had time to discard any of those emotions. So I can't imagine at this point he has any remorse, or he's ever going to express any remorse, because he doesn't have it. So that part of it, and I would agree with you, I have to say, because from a psychological standpoint, as well as from a police officer standpoint, nobody can argue that seeing a model of a house is equivalent to walking through this house and seeing where people were, where they were found, how the house was laid out, where Maddie and Kaylee were upstairs. I mean, there's no substitute for that.
No. And
So-
Dr. Joni, just before I forget about this, him doing these recons, these say 23 recons, him reliving, is that part of the psychosexual excitement that he gets from planning this? And even as far as, we always put this picture up on the screen. That is a trophy. That is a serial killer trophy. That's him on the same morning of the murders celebrating, I did it. I got away with this. And I can look at this picture now forever and just remember that was the morning of the murders, and get his jollies from that. And how about this? The Grim Reaper look, and of course the balaclava. All of these things, I think, are so significant to the planning, the execution, and I think that's how he gets his jollies off, Dr. Joni.
And the psychology. You're absolutely right. And I was responding to these kind of, incel versus serial killer theories, because that's what I keep saying online is this argument. It's one or the other. And absolutely, he has some very, very interesting ways, as you talked about, this thumbs up. I mean, that's kind of a serial killer vibes there. The fact, I mean, this guy, I was watching a podcast earlier about, the fact that Bryan Kohberger is living his best life, and he wanted to get caught, and he planned to impress Catherine Ramsland. I don't buy any of that. I really don't. I think this was somebody who had translated his pain, like many people who had gone before him, into this anger and rage and sex, and they had become fused for him. And so he was absolutely determined to get revenge, to get, to act out his rage, and also to convince himself he was smarter than everybody else in the room and do all this reconnaissance. And I think he didn't think he was ever going to get caught. And I absolutely believe that after a period of time, when if he had gotten away with it, those fantasies and that urge and that desire to do that would have happened again.
100%. And Dr. Joe, so I don't know if it's for many of you, if that's the first time you saw this, but let's do that times two, because Jim Clemente, the celebrity FBI, retired FBI agent, head writer for Criminal Minds, attorney, profiler, he agreed with every single word she said in regards to his psychosexual nature of this crime. But yet it was never brought up by any of the investigators. It was never suggested. It didn't seem like any of the investigators went to the experts. Emily Parkinson from the chat, congratulations. Thank you for being a member for 11 months. Really appreciate that. Someone in the chat said something before. Why would Bill Thompson be intimidated or be urged on by the University of Idaho? Because of their power and money. And guess what the University of Idaho was losing? Because of that house was standing up as a constant reminder that 4 of their students were slaughtered inside it. Do you think, would you send your kids to the University of Idaho with that constant reminder there? I certainly wouldn't. So they wanted that house down as soon as possible. So they put some pressure in areas silently. We don't know about that, but I know the way things work. And I think we all have seen the politics, especially in places like New York City. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. You like real crime, true crime from a police perspective. You're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if you want to contribute to us financially. We have a Patreon with 4 different levels. We have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you can support the Police Off the Cuff podcast by contributing to this show. And we'd really appreciate all the new members in the Police Off the Cuff family. And now a word from our sponsor. FanDuel's got an offer you don't want to miss this NFL season. New customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet $5, and if it wins, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. You can build parlays, bet player props, ride the live lines, whatever your style. FanDuel has you covered. The NFL season is here. The only question is, are you ready to play? You must be 21 years or older and present in select states for Kansas and affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in D.C., Kentucky, or Wyoming. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbookfanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 1-800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NEW YORK or text HOPE New York in New York. You know, folks, when we look at this case and we look at the overkill nature of these beautiful kids, these beautiful students, it says something to us, you know. Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, Kaylee Gonsalves, Ethan Chapin. Like, can you look at inmate 163214, look at him with that 1,000-yard stare, and look at him as a human being? What I look at is a soulless savage, an absolute soulless savage that wanted to be someone, that wanted to do something that made him more than an anonymous person that he really is. And that is what he did, inmate number 163214. He wanted to become something more than the zero, than the loser that he absolutely is. And later on, we'll play a little bit of Olivia Gonsalves's impact statement just near the end. Every time I hear it, I just want to give her a standing ovation. This is back to Court TV.
Wounds. Her fatal injuries included lacerations in her right lung and heart with only sharp force injuries. To make it even harder, to make it even sadder, Phil, defensive wounds, 50. She fought for her life, literally, and the autopsy proves that.
It does, and I think if you look at the differences that you see in the autopsy reports for these individuals, I believe it was it Morgan's that it was only fatal, it was only sharp force. Kaylee, you have the asphyxiation, and then with Zaina, you do have the defensive wounds. So it suggests, it certainly would be consistent with an unfolding of events where Morgan is kept caught completely off guard. Kaylee becomes aware of what's happening maybe right before it does, and he has to hold her down. And by the time he comes to Zaina, she is aware of what's happening in the house and trying to do something or defend herself. So just a horrific picture of events, and I think that is borne out in the police reports and the observations of the first responders when they arrive.
Yeah, and we do know that Xana had received a DoorDash delivery in the minutes before, within 15, 20 minutes before the murders. And according to her phone activity, she was on watching TikTok videos, so she was awake. So she must have heard something up from the third floor and then engaged with the suspect, but 50 plus wounds is horrific. Now, Ethan, this is the autopsy findings for Ethan Chapin. Fatal injury was from a stab wound under his left clavicle. The wound severed his jugular vein, subclavian artery. He only had sharp injuries as well. Was he asleep? Was he... You have to think that if Xana fought back, that maybe he was just waking up, or if he was killed first. We don't know. We don't know, but what we do know is that these four beautiful people were absolutely just butchered in a way that is savage. And again, it comes back to how would you fuel that and we don't know, but you're right, Joanna, there seems to have to be something, unless he's Mr. Warrior going to fight in his
So I just want to, for those that believe everything Bill Thompson is saying about this, how do you explain this attack? He just randomly said, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, there's 1122 King Road, I'm going in there. Is that what you really think? Is that what people think, that he just randomly chose this house? That is so naive to think that. Actually ridiculous to think that. He targeted this house. There is no doubt he targeted it. And, I know the old expression, when you assume you make an ass of you and me, but this is more than an assumption. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Bill. When you look at what what the CNN people said, and he talked about Madison Morgan being first, Kaylee second, and then you've got Zaina third, and that's what I was thinking. The first person you kill, you surprise them. There isn't a sound that you make beforehand. You got the surprise in them. So then Kaylee wakes up, and suddenly now you've got to struggle with her. That's how I kind of figured also it would go out, and we all kind of believe that was the order of the killings. But when you count up, just from what we heard there, of all the stab wounds, you're talking in the range of 110 to 120 stab wounds altogether. 50 on Zaina, 30 here, 25 here. You're well over 100. And so that shows a tremendous anger, tremendous expelling of energy, expenditure of energy on these people. You have to have the anger like unbelievable that you've never had before, to such an extent that you are like an automaton on fire going after all of these people. There had to be a reason why he did what he did that day. And Bill Thompson didn't want to go there whatsoever. No conjecture, nothing. The only thing he even spoke about in one interview, he said that his people had talked to the FBI profilers, and the FBI profilers had told him, well, you can't believe anything that he would tell you. And so therefore we didn't bother, because we went with their word. He threw it, rather than take it on his shoulders and say, maybe we should have done it. He threw it onto the FBI to say, that's actually kind of like the reason why we didn't think he would talk to us or say anything that was true. He was willing to give up and not even go after. In the final analysis, he did not go after BK as hard as he could. He wanted that house knocked down, and that was a mistake too. Ann Taylor even made a motion towards the very end that to limit the use of that house, because she complained that the 3D version of the house that they were going to show wouldn't show the house correctly in proportion. That's how ridiculous that whole knocking down the house was. Bill Thompson folded like wet cardboard because he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And he sold out his own case to make it more acceptable to the public. And he did it. And that was a very cynical, terrible, dirty, backhanded, underhanded thing that he did. And he should apologize to the public. He never will. He probably will retire and write his book, but he should be ashamed of himself.
I think so too. I want to play, this is on Banfield, another disturbing new piece of evidence is that some of the wounds were post-mortem, which shows overkill and a real sickness from inmate 163214.
And with that, I want to bring in my colleague, Brian Enton. Brian, you talked to Olivia, and I'm sure you guys went into depth about that TikTok post. I'm still slightly unclear about what experimental means and how she learned or heard that term.
Yeah, so it seems this is something, Ashley, that she was told when she had this meeting with the prosecutor, with Bill Thompson, and also with law enforcement. And she went by herself, by the way. It's something she wanted to do by herself. So, she lives in California. She flew to Idaho, and she went by herself to sit at a table with all of them and get her questions answered. A lot of them still don't have answers just because, we don't know the motive. There's a lot that the prosecutor just doesn't know. But she did get a full list of wounds. And I think the presumption initially was that that a lot of these wounds came because Kaylee was fighting back against Bryan Kohberger. And it seems now that may not be the case. Some of the wounds, and it's sort of just like disgusting to talk about, but when she says experimental, some of these wounds may have been Bryan Kohberger just, stabbing in places and just almost like experimenting in a way, and some even after Kaylee was already dead.
So basically just sadism, just a sick
Yeah.
person doing even sicker things after he had done the sickest thing. And that was just, but I'm curious about the amount of time that he had in the house. You know, it's like, I think it's hard to know exactly when he opened the door. All we know are the accounts of when they heard things in the house and when he was driving out of the neighborhood. But it's, you know, it's roughly about 20 minutes. Was there even enough time for him to, and I hate to use the word, but it would be his sadistic description, play with his victims and do those things after he killed them?
Yeah, it seems there would be. I mean, you know, we, like you said, we don't know the exact time frame, but we know that he was in the house between roughly 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. Granted, we don't know how long it took for him to get in and out and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it seems there would be enough time for him to do that, and it's pretty disturbing to think about.
So in the face-to-face meeting that Olivia had with the prosecutor, man, this is a long time coming, right? There's just been so much they've wanted to know, and they've been left in the dark with you know, the rest of us, and it just feels so unfair to victims. I understand why, but did she come away with the meeting, from the meeting with the prosecutors, with a better understanding of their process or who they are or what they were doing? Because there was a lot of acrimony there for a long time.
Yes, she did. And I think they almost sort of came to terms with each other. At least for her, I think she left with more respect for the prosecutor. Of course, she still doesn't agree with the plea deal, and her family has been very outspoken about being upset with a lot of things along the way when it comes to how the state handled the case. But I think I know she left with more respect for them, sort of a mutual understanding. And it's interesting, Ashley, she said that when she went to this meeting, you know, she was sort of didn't know whether or not she wanted to see some of these autopsy photos for herself. And she said, can you ensure to me that none of these photos will leak? And they basically said no, and that they think there is a leaker, which is what she told me. And so her feeling was, well, if there's any possibility that the photos could leak, I want to see at least some of them for myself so that I'm not shocked. And so she did that.
Wow, I can't even imagine what that would be like and how she'll recover from that, because you can never unsee those things. And
you know, Phil, you can't even imagine like seeing autopsy photos. All of us here have been to autopsies. NYPD, if you were in the homicide squad and you were assigned a murder case, you were required to attend the autopsy. Many detectives did not like that. No one likes to go to an autopsy, but it's a necessary element of the job for an investigator to be able to competently testify about what they saw, the wounds they saw, what they were told by the pathologist, the cause of death, bullet track, knife wound track, all of those type of things, the wound that was the death wound. So it's a very unpleasant thing, but detectives must do that as part of their job. Phil?
Yeah, I think it would be counterproductive for an investigator that's assigned to homicide not to go to the autopsy for all of the things that Bill just indicated. You could get some very specific details about how the murder took place with regard to conferring with and observing the autopsy. Now, with regard to the postmortem wounds, now postmortem means after death. When I looked up a killer exhibiting postmortem wounds, I got it's ritualistic or symbolistic meaning. Hurting a victim after death can signal the killer's need for control, expression of contempt. Sound familiar? Also, dehumanization. It often suggests the perpetrator sees the victim as an object less than human. And in extreme cases, post-mortem mutilation reflects deep psychological disturbance, sexual sadism, or delusional thinking. So when you look into the study of what we know about serial killers and killers in general that use knives and do these post-mortem type of injuries, we know that Bryan BK will fall into that category. So that young lady, Olivia Gonzalez, that did those things and went and met with those prosecutors, I can't think of anything more brave. And Bill, I hope, and I know you said you're going to play it, I love to see that, because that closing of the last episodes of BK in court, I couldn't applaud that more. She definitely needed a standing ovation for sure.
Well, I'm going to play it right now. This is
Perfect timing.
Olivia Gonsalves giving her impact statement. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'll play near the very end, but you'll get the point from listening to her right now.
Going back to Moscow, not even once. After stalking them there for months. If you were really smart, do you think you'd be here right now? What's it like needing this much attention just to feel real? You're terrified of being ordinary, aren't you? Do you feel anything at all? Or are you exactly what you always feared? Nothing. If you're so powerful, then why are you still hiding, defendant? You see, I'm here today as me. But who are you? Let's try to take off your mask and see. You didn't create devastation. You revealed it in yourself. And that darkness you carry, that emptiness, you'll sit with it long after this is over. That is your sentence. And it was written on the wall long before you ever pled guilty. You didn't win. You just exposed yourself as the coward you are. You're a delusional, pathetic, hypochondriac loser who thought you were so much smarter than everybody else. Constantly scolding, turning your nose up to grammar mistakes, nitpicking and criticizing others. You wanted so badly to be different, to be special, to be better, to be deep, to be mysterious. You found yourself thinking you were better than everyone else, and you thought you could figure out the human psyche and see through it, all while tweaked out on heroin. Lurking in the shadows made you feel powerful because no one ever paid you any attention in the light. You thought you were exceptional, all because of a grade on a paper. You thought you were elite because your online IQ test from 2010 told you so. All of that effort just to seem important. It's desperate. There is a name for your condition, though. Your inflated ego just didn't allow you to see it. Wannabe. You act like no one could ever understand your mind, but the truth is you're basic. You're a textbook case of insecurity disguised as control. Your patterns are predictable. Your motives are shallow. You are not profound. You're pathetic. You aren't special or deep, not mysterious or exceptional. Don't ever get it twisted again. No one is scared of you today. No one is intimidated by you. No one is impressed by you. No one thinks that you are important. You orchestrated this like you thought you were God. Now look at you, begging a courtroom for scraps. You spent months preparing, and still all it took was my sister in a sheath. You work so hard to seem dangerous, but real control doesn't have to prove itself. The truth is, the scariest part about you is how painfully average you turned out to be. The truth is, you're as dumb as they come. Stupid, clumsy, slow, sloppy, weak, dirty. Let me be very clear. Don't ever try to convince yourself you mattered just because someone finally said your name out loud. I see through you. You want the truth? Here's the one you'll hate the most. If you hadn't attacked them in their sleep, in the middle of the night, like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your fucking ass. Thank you.
Wow. 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 That just puts a smile on your face, that small little prize, but it was a prize. It was a prize to the audience, to the court, to the whole public that followed this case, to see her just smack this dirtbag, inmate number 163214. And that's the last words we heard from her to say to this. I don't know. I won't use his name, but it just absolutely horrific. Guys, I'm going to give you your last thoughts. Let's keep it brief. Mike, first, your final thoughts.
Yeah, Bill, when you look back on this and all the pain that had gone on and all the investigation and all the information and all the shows we've done, and it comes down to him just pleading guilty 4 times and getting away with it. You know, anyone and everyone can be excused for feeling like it's incomplete, and that is a hollow victory for the prosecution. The good thing is, yes, he is in prison. The sad thing is, the prosecutor had the ability to get a lot more evidence and to help it to explain to the public what was the dynamics going on, and he lost it. He just couldn't deliver that final little bit of evidence, and that's sad. And everybody loses out in that case. But we do know, and what we've just recently been told about the defensive wounds is that, yeah, he's as sick or even more sick than we even thought possible because of what those defensive wounds mean. And Phil hit it right on the head when he talked about them.
Absolutely. Phil, your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. That young woman, I think, is the hero of the year for me, Olivia Gonzalez. She couldn't have did a better job, and she showed tremendous courage to meet with the prosecutors and ask to see some of those horrific crime scene photos. We all had experience with crime scenes and crime scene photos. We know how horrific they can be. And as evidence comes out about this case, we get a better picture. We get a better profile of who BK was and what he really intended for these victims. Again, as I always say, thoughts and prayers go out to the families and the victims in this case: Xana Kernodle, Katie Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, and Ethan Chapin. May they rest in peace, and may their families find some peace and solace in the justice that was meted out.
Absolutely. Very well said. Folks, I see a lot of new people in the chat tonight. Just make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, share, and make lots of comments, and join the Police Off the Cuff family. Have a good night, everyone. God bless.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.